everyone. Welcome to Wandering DMs. I'm Paul.
And I'm Dan. And on today's show, we'll be talking to Keith Ammann, who is, of course, the author of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, Combat Tactics for Dungeon Masters, and the soon-to-be-released sequel, MOAR, Monsters Know What They're Doing. Keith, thank you so much for making time to join us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'll remind that viewers that we do have Super Chat running on YouTube, so if there is a question you really want to get us to Keith and we missed it, that's an option, and we'll make sure to get that in the show if you do that. One thing, Keith, I noticed this morning is that you won 2 Emmy Awards in 2020 with The Monsters Know What They're Doing, one for your online blog, and then another one for a Silver Award for Best Writing for the book. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. I got the gold for the website because I didn't have to compete against Merc Board. They just ran the table. Every category they competed in. There was no hope. There was no hope for anyone else that year. But yeah, winning silver was still pretty satisfying.
Super good.
Awesome.
Super good. You know, we had in 2020, Paul and I had a 5th edition tournament show that we called the Big Bad, and I'm not the biggest 5th edition expert, even though I was running the monsters. And in retrospect, I really wish that I'd had your book, because there were certain stumbles that I made, and afterwards I was like, somebody must have analyzed this earlier, and I should have had Keith's book in front of me. So next time, that's my plan, frankly, to be perfectly honest.
What was the monster?
Well, I had a high-level cleric. I had a high-level evil high priest, so I had to handle a very intelligent specialist caster. I also had an entire team of acolytes who were all casting spells, and then we also had purple worms and stone elementals in the picture. But gauging the spells was really the big issue that I had a couple hiccups on.
I think you did reasonably well there, Dan.
Yeah, I covered it. I covered it, but next time I plan to be much better. When I look at Keith's books, of course. So Keith, let's talk about your new book that is already available for pre-order. If you go to Keith's website at monstersknow.com, see a bunch of links to the pre-orders. So I think among the things you're adding in the new book are sections.
Just to clarify, the pre-order links are at spyandowl.com. There are pre-order links on themonstersknow.com too, but yeah. But they're all collected right now on spyandowl.com.
Awesome. And so right now on screen we see on the left Keith's original book, The Monsters Know What They're Doing. On the far right, there's the players-oriented book, and those are all out now, called Live to Tell the Tale. And right in the middle is the cover to his new book that's going to come out in a month or two, called MOAR, Monsters Know What They're Doing. So I think among the things you're putting in the new book are some sections on like particular novel environments or situations. What are maybe you can tell us about some of those that you're including in the new book?
Well, so the book overall collects the monsters from Volo's Guide to Monsters and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. And I have a few more digressions in this one on various topics. I do, at the beginning of the book, go into more depth about how to analyze monsters that are not covered in the books. And I use as a case study a monster of my own creation that I actually created for the book called the Bin Azg. But so there are sidebar sections on handling counterspell, on running very intelligent enemies, on running monsters of different types fighting together, and you talked about environments. What I'm specifically talking about is darkness, and specifically the darkness spell. How do you deal with that? And that comes out of an insight that I had when I was analyzing the Dragloth for the blog, and trying to figure out strategies for fighting in magical darkness. Because one of the oddities of Dragloth and Drow, like, lots of Drow adjacent creatures, they can cast darkness, but they can't see through it. They don't have double sight or anything equivalent to that lets them see through the magical darkness. Even their superior dark vision doesn't do that. So what's the deal? Why would you want to cast this spell? So often it seems like a trap choice, and honestly, a way to sandbag your teammates, to mess up their day. And I started looking at how the condition rules interact with each other, and I had my epiphany, my eureka moment, which is that darkness is the equalizer, because everyone in it is effectively blinded, which means they have disadvantage on attacks, and attacks against them have advantage, and also invisible, which means their attacks have advantage and attacks against them have disadvantage. So simultaneously, everyone who is involved in combat in this field of darkness has both advantage and disadvantage on all their attacks, and there's advantage and disadvantage on all attacks against them, which, if you read the advantage and disadvantage rules, you can't have both. When you have both, you have neither. And because there is, for everyone in this arena, a source of advantage and a source of disadvantage, what it means is that every source of advantage or disadvantage on attack rolls is squelched. So it's the equalizer, it's the great leveler. And the ultimate, and it even affects people who are outside the field of darkness, but shooting in with ranged weapons. It's the same for them, because on the one hand, their targets can't see them to avoid the shot, but on the other hand, they can't see the targets and have to make educated guesses based on what they can hear or whatever.
Now, if I remember my rules here right, Keith, disadvantage and advantage don't stack either, right? So
they
you're
don't
not
stack.
equalizing.
You have one of each. Yeah, it's not diplomacy. It's not like support versus support. Which that was something I needed to clarify very early on for myself. No, as soon as you have one advantage and one disadvantage, all advantage and disadvantage is canceled out, and so you have this. You now have this area of effect in which advantage and disadvantage simply no longer apply to attack rolls. You cannot gain either. And it becomes a situation that favors whoever has the most raw power. Whoever gets the greatest number of attacks, has the best to hit modifier, deals the best damage, which in many cases is the Dragloth. So that's where it comes back around. The Dragloth is favored in a situation like this because it is tough. It is a tough brute. But as far as player characters go, it is actually not as bad a situation as you think for the player's character side, except for rogues. Rogues still get to complain because they need advantage in order to get sneak attack damage, or they need to be attacking someone who also has one of their allies active and adjacent to the enemy. So they can still do a backstab, but they can't do a snipe, basically. Or they can do it, but they're not going to get their sneak attack damage off.
Right, which is the whole point of being a rogue, right? Is to get that sneak attack damage.
Yeah. I mean, without it, what are you?
It's huge.
So, So if you are playing a rogue in a darkness situation, you have to get in there, listen closely, figure out where everyone is, and backstab, because you're not going to get your sneak attack damage any other way. But the other thing about darkness is when one side says we're overmatched, it favors fleeing, because you can't take an attack of opportunity against an enemy you can't see. And so in darkness, in fog cloud, any situation in which the area is heavily obscured. If you have heavily obscured visibility, it's easy to run away because you don't have to disengage in order to avoid the opportunity attacks. So those are the two big effects that heavy obscurity has: darkness, fog cloud. Now, of course, if you do have someone in magical darkness with devil's sight, they're gonna rule. They are the boss in that situation.
Interesting. You know, and you started noting that it seems problematic for things like Drow to have both dark sight and being able to cast darkness, and that's been a problem that's bugged me since first edition. I mean, that exact same problem jumped out at me when the Drow first appeared in the first edition Against the Giant series. And I mean, some viewers might know that has bothered me so much that I actually house ruled. I don't house roll too many spells, but I specifically house ruled the darkness spell to work differently because of that. When we were running our tournament game, we wanted to honor the 5th edition rules as written. I don't think darkness came up, but we continually were scrambling to find the right ruling for stuff like fog cloud or sleet storm or even insect plague that has either light or heavy obscurement. And I think every episode where that popped up, Paul and I had to touch base afterwards and re-research what the proper ruling for that stuff is. Do you find that complicated in practice, Keith? Do you feel that you've bobbled that at all? Because it seems like a number of rules that you're having to sync up together to find what the effect is.
One of the advantages of writing the blog is having to think about it in advance prepares me for when the issue comes up in a game session. So I'm usually pretty well equipped to handle these things in-game because I'm not caught by surprise having to think through it for the first time. Either I've already figured it out or I know where in the books I need to go look it up. Which, by the way, just for everyone out there who feels insecure about their level of rules expertise, this is a little professional wisdom that I have from having worked for many years as a copy editor. You don't have to know all the rules. What you need is that little alarm in your head that goes off to tell you when to look something up and the knowledge of where to look it up. That's all you need. As long as you know where to find the answer quickly, you don't have to have that answer in your head all the time.
I think that's good advice. And I think that it's similar, like just knowing the name of an ability or rule, or where, if you need to look it up in the index or something like that, gives you vastly more power than if you're just totally guessing. Yeah.
Or just knowing things chapter by chapter, knowing that in the player's handbook, section 5 is gear, section 7 is the process of it. 7 is using ability scores, 8 is adventuring, 9 is combat, 10 is spellcasting. Or in the Dungeon Master's Guide, chapter 3 is where you find the encounter building guidelines. Chapter 8 is all of the miscellaneous tables. In fact, I just remember page 249. Almost all of the tables that I need to look up in the Dungeon Master's Guide, or have needed over the years to look up in the Dungeon Master's Guide, are within 2 or 3 pages of page 249. So I just open to 249 and then flip backward and forward.
Great.
That's funny.
That's great.
I think it's fascinating how much we kind of create these just through this muscle memory or these visual landmarks with the text, which I think is really fascinating. I think it's one of the most important parts of like good interior art in rule books, right? Because those also, I think,
it helps you navigate.
Landmarks. Yeah.
That's a good point. For me, with the first edition DMG, I can usually stick my thumbnail, as you're saying, about 3 pages away from whatever rule I need to look up at a particular moment. So, which is which I like having a physical book for. I like having the physicality, frankly, of how deep is it on the Z-axis into the book.
Although I will also say, you know what the number one thing I like best about D&D Beyond is that I can go to the URL bar in my browser and start typing the name of a monster, get the URL, and go straight to it because I've done it so many times.
Yeah.
Or if I
Nice.
know that I have not looked one up and I'm looking it up for the first time, I just start typing monster or spells or magic -item, and it's going to take me to the search menu, and then I can find what I need from there. Those little shortcuts, they built that really well. I have to give them big kudos for that because that's not something everyone would have thought of.
Certainly,
Nice.
certainly, I think as as the breadth of books increases, the ability to have a digitized version with hyperlinking and search is very valuable. I think, and I certainly I did that when I was running Fifth at the table. Right, I would have an iPad or a laptop flipped open to just a tab of the search bar on D&D Beyond, so I could quickly pull whatever it was I needed up.
Nice.
Yeah.
Super nice.
Yeah. I want to ask Dan. Wait, I want to go back to Darkness here, because my recollection, Dan, is one of the big issues that you and I faced consistently, and I'm curious if Keith has a take on this. Was the question of if an enemy is in an area of heavy obscurement, and I am outside, and I have a spell or I have a ranged weapon, can I target that person in the heavy obscurement?
I wanted to ask that exact same question, except in the other direction. So among the things that happened on the Big Bad at one point is, and again, I have a high-level priest. I have a couple acolytes. They're trying to get a ritual accomplished, not a technical by-the-book ritual, but a thing that's going to take a little bit of time. And the players hit me with a sleet storm, which causes obscurement. Can they now cast spells in? Can I cast spells out? Am I better off in that situation, or am I worse off at that point? As a caster.
So obscurity does not. Okay, number one, obscurity in and of itself does not create cover. Beyond that, the number one thing as far as spell casting is concerned is, does the wording of the spell say targeting a creature you can see? If it says a creature you can see, then you're hosed. You cannot cast that spell at a target you can't see. And if it's heavily obscured, you can't see them. If it's a point within range, that's fair game. And or a creature within range. If it says within range, but not that you can see, you can target them. As far as attacking with, for example, a ranged weapon or a thrown weapon is concerned, that is, you can always do that. It's a disadvantage because you can't see them. Although if their vision is heavily obscured, it's an advantage because they can't see you to dodge it, so cancel. But then the other issue is, are you attacking into the right space? And that's where you have to consider that you can not only see enemies, potentially, but hear them as well. You hear their footsteps, you hear their armor clanking, or their scales doing whatever scales do.
Loudly eating, perhaps.
Yeah, and you aim your attack at the sound. Yeah. Going. You aim your attack at the sound, and but you can hide. You can take the hide action anytime you can't be seen, and if you successfully hide, you are now unseen and unheard, and you can move around as long as people can't see you. You can move around freely, and people can lose track of your position. So if you are hidden, then I would say your enemy has to either infer or guess what space you are in and attack the space rather than you. And if they guessed right, they get you. If they they have the chance to get you, if they roll a hit. If they guess wrong, they just, they shot magic missile at the darkness.
Well, how do you reconcile that though with we are sitting around a table with miniatures on a board and everyone can plainly see where you are, like as players?
Well, if you're hidden, I'm taking that miniature off.
Yeah, you want to take the miniature off start doing secret notation. Yeah. Yep.
Or just mentally track it. And for the
the
players,
other,
what I would usually do is just like take off the miniature and replace it with a poker chip or something like that.
Mm-hmm. That's sort of marking the last known location.
Well, actually, you could leave the You could do it a couple of ways. You could mark the last known location with the chip and then move the figure, or you could just remove the figure entirely, but then move the chip to represent where you are, but also simultaneously the fact that you're invisible. And then when you reappear, replace the figure. I mean, that's however a table wants to do it. There's no right or wrong way.
Right.
It's whatever you've got. I make huge use of miniature poker chips when I play at a real table. That's my all-purpose miniature substitute. It's what I use for creatures that I don't consider important enough to buy and paint a miniature for. I have them in a whole bunch of different colors so I can keep track of creature types, factions, what have you.
I assume this is actually probably a solved problem on digital. Like if we're playing Roll20, I assume I can probably do something clever, like make my miniature only visible to me and the DM.
Move it. You just move it to you move the token from the token layer to the DM layer.
Yeah. Fascinating. Never really thought of that as a possible benefit of digital play. Interesting. All right, let me go back though, because I have another question, which is: so you specifically calling out hearing. What about other senses? Like, what about smell or tremor sense? How do those play in? Do those just cut through? Do those just obviate?
Obscurity doesn't affect them. Obscurity only affects sight. It doesn't affect hearing. It doesn't affect anything else. Now, there are some things that do affect hearing. The deafened condition is one, but there are other things, and I can't think of any off the top of my head. But I know there are ones. High wind in the DMG. When you look under adventuring environments, wilderness, there is high wind imposes disadvantage on hearing checks, and so then if, let's say, it's pitch dark and you're trying to find someone who is hidden, unseen, and unheard, you can say, I look for them, which you're not going to find them, not in darkness. Or you can say, I listen for them, and then you're going to make a perception check based on hearing. Suppose it's only lightly obscured. Then you can say, I listen for them, make your perception check based on hearing. Or I look for them. You can make a perception check based on sight, but because the area is lightly obscured, you're going to be making that check at disadvantage. And then you have things like tremor sense. Tremor sense just cuts through all of that. It's vibrations through the ground. Nothing's going to suppress that. Or blind sight. Nothing's going to fool blind sight. Keen smell. My personal interpretation of smell is that you can only use smell to pinpoint a creature's location if you have the keen smell trait, or one of the combo traits like keen hearing and smell. You can perceive them through smell if they smell bad enough or strongly enough. You can perceive through smell, but you cannot pinpoint location through smell unless you have a keen smell trait. But that's I don't even know if that rises to the level of what I would call a house rule, because I don't think it's ever come up at my table. It's just that's the decision I've made in my head for if it ever does come up.
I see in a couple of places on your blog you've mentioned more than once how powerful the keen smell ability is, because there's no range limit to it. And as you pointed out, in the real world, creatures like elephants or bears can smell other creatures from miles away potentially. So that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, let's pivot a little bit. Thank you so much. I think that's going to be very, very useful.
I know what this segues to. I know what this segues to.
Right. Well, I mean, the book's about monsters, right? Admittedly, the book's about monsters, so we should probably talk about a couple of monsters. And I picked out like 2 or maybe 3, and I thought, for my purposes, it would be interesting. I hope you guys forgive me to look at a monster that was both in an early edition as well as 5th edition, as well as something that was maybe a little bit challenging for Keith to analyze. And so the first one that popped out at me was the Lucrata monster. And the Lucrata appeared initially in the 1st edition AD&D Monster Manual. And all 3 of us, I believe, are delighted by the Dave Trampier illustration there from 1st edition that we're looking at right now. And of course, that is a large-sized lion, horse, stag, badger, hyena combination.
The description in Volos is absolutely hilarious. I have
what does
to
it
know.
say there?
A Lucrata is what you would get if you took the head of a giant badger, the brain of a person who likes to torture and eat people, the legs of a deer, and the body of a large hyena, put them together, and reanimated them with demon ichor without bothering to cover up the stink of death. I am like 70 to 80% certain that Chris Perkins wrote that. That's got to have been him. Maybe there might have been. Maybe somebody else wrote that, but my money is on Chris Perkins wrote that. If anyone knows to the contrary, I would love to know.
That's great. That's great. Maybe one of our viewers know who wrote that in Volos.
Very, very evocative of the powerful necromancer leaning over his cauldron and being like, "Should I put some perfume in? Screw it.
Let's make it smell worse."
Now we're saying, and we're saying that this originally appeared in 1st edition, but I must say, if we go all the way back, this is a creature from actual Indian mythology. Indian mythology, and Pliny the Elder first told us about it in the 1st century AD. So this monster goes way, way back.
Is that this image, Dan?
that is an illustration from a 15th century medieval bestiary for the Lucrata, actually.
I was going to say Dave Trampier, age 11.
One interesting thing in the illustration that doesn't come through in D&D Monsters is that its mouth is supposed to go all the way back into its ears, historically, and so it can unhinge its whole mouth and like swallow up a whole man because the mouth comes open. But let's talk about D&D. So among the things that the Lucrata has in all editions of D&D and mythology is that it can make itself sound like a human being. So it tends to like give a cry and go, "Oh, I'm a princess, and somebody needs to rescue me," or something like that. And then
just a whimpering child or something. Yeah.
Exactly. So one thing that you point out on your blog, Keith, is that this is clearly an ambushing type monster, but it doesn't have stealth. How did you make use of that?
So the ambush predator skill combination, I use this as a proxy, as a token for indicating that something is an ambush predator. Anytime I see perception and stealth together in the skill proficiencies. But as you pointed out, the Lucrata does not have stealth. So it's trying to fool you into thinking that it is something other than what it is, but it cannot make itself unseen. And so the solution that I came up with, based on the mimicry trait and the fact that it has keen smell, is that it takes advantage of fog. Taking advantage of its dark vision is not enough, because its dark vision range is not longer than the range of most other creatures with dark vision. It's the standard 60 feet. So it's not like the drow where it can see you coming from an additional 60 feet away. Its dark vision range is the same as yours. So it has to be able to sense you when you cannot sense it, except in the guise that it's putting on through its mimicry. And so my conclusion is that a foggy knight is a Lucrata knight. They take advantage of fog and maybe also environmental obstacles to vision, like they'll hide in ruins or forests or something like that, where they have things that they can hide behind for when somebody gets close up to it. And then when the victim approaches closely enough, because it has the keen smell, it can tell where you are based on smell alone. And it has that 50-foot movement, so it's fast. As soon as you come within the range of the movement, it strikes.
Now, our viewer Joshua is actually asking a pretty good question here, and that's good. I think this is good. I don't know if you can put that up on screen, Paul.
Yeah. So Joshua here asks, doesn't that imply it can't hunt humans easily? It's only ever other races that have dark vision.
I think he's saying it can hunt humans. I think he's saying humans would be the preferred prey. Yeah.
But the point is, it's hunting in a circumstance that gives them advantage over all creatures, including ones with dark vision. Whereas an ambush predator that couldn't do this might have to limit itself to hunting humans and halflings and other creatures that don't have dark vision, and would have to leave, let's say, wood elves alone. It would know better than to go after them, because it they would run away, or they would find it and hunt it. Other creatures, yes, they would. Other ambush predators would have potentially that disadvantage, but Lucratas don't. They can be broader. They can attack more different types of humanoids.
Nice. Now, remind me, what is the
exact? Now, the one thing about the Lucrata that I could not figure out to fit in was kicking retreat, because here you have a brute attacker. It wants to stay engaged in melee. If it's attacking in pea soup fog, it never actually needs to disengage, because you can't opportunity attack a creature you can't see. So the solution I came up with is kicking retreat is what it uses when the fog is dispersed and the jig is up.
Nice.
Interesting.
Nice. And that's an ability that's been there since first edition. So
yeah, that's true. It's right there in the first edition description. I feel like it's very evocative for setting up an encounter, right? Like just the description and the analysis of the abilities alone. Like, I'm immediately imagining maybe a wood elf outpost where the players go in and the fog sets in and they pull in all their scouts and they say, "Don't go out tonight. The Lucrata are out." Right?
Yeah.
But of course, then supply some reason for them to go out. Like, nope, we need to. Got to go out there. All right, good luck.
What exactly is the rule text on the fog? Or is that heavy obscurement, or is that something else, Keith?
Fog can be light or heavy depending on how thick it is.
Okay.
And if you cast fog cloud, that is heavy.
Okay. And either one will help the Lucrata out, or do they specifically need heavy obscurement?
No, you want the heavy. You really want the heavy.
Okay. Fascinating. Okay. Great. All right. Okay, that's good to know. So now I know how to use Lucrata in my games of 5th edition. Thank you so much for that. Let's talk about for the other two things. I hope it's okay if we talk about. I think I want to talk about the Cave Fisher, because I challenged Paul with 1 minute to go before the show. There's no way he would have a hard copy of the product that it first appeared in. And then he pulled out his first edition Dungeons of the Slave Lords by Lawrence Schick, which is where Cave Fishers first appeared. And sure enough, Paul absolutely had that.
Yep.
And then I also found a great Errol Otis piece of art for it, which we were debating a little bit before the show. So this is one that had a significant change between 1st and 5th edition. Not a lot of changes, but one really notable change. So in 5th edition, what's the primary thing that the cave fisher that we see on screen does, Keith?
It fishes. It is a very, very literal name. You know, when I first saw it, I never read. I just, you know, flipping through the pages. Cave fisher. Okay, blah blah blah. You know, flipping through the pages of the book, and cave fisher. I don't know. It kind of reminded me of silverfish, like, which are neither silver nor fish. They're centipedes. And so, like, that was the image I got in my head for some reason. And then I was writing the blog, got to it. I don't know if I wrote it for the blog, or I think I wrote it for the blog, or just for the book. Sometimes it's been a while, I forget. I was looking at the stat block. I'm like, oh, okay. It lives in caves and it fishes for prey. I mean, that is like a total literal description of what it is and what it does. Like, all right. Don't need to get fancy here. But yeah, it's got a sticky filament like a spider web, and it like extends it out, and something touches it and it yanks it back.
Now, obviously, the best way to use your cave fisher is how for the DM?
So the set phrase I always talk about in relation to ambush predators is that they don't go after the toughest animal in the herd. They go after the young, the old, the weak, the isolated, the oblivious. And the thing about the cave fisher is, on the one hand, it can't really target who goes across its filament. But what it does is, when something that it can reel in does go across its filament, it can yank it in, and it does the isolating. So it doesn't have to pick the one that wandered off from the group. It takes its prey away from the group that its prey was part of a moment ago. Now, if you know, it can only haul in up to 200 pounds. It has a weight limit. And, you know, many medium-sized humanoids, even if they themselves don't weigh 200 pounds, they plus their gear weigh more. And so if they tried to pull that in, the prey would just fall off the filament. And so suppose multiple creatures get stuck to the filament before it yanks the filament back. I say, well, you know what? The cave fisher doesn't choose who it gets. Physics chooses. The lightest one sticks and all the others fall off. And it doesn't really have the intelligence or the wisdom to think about who it's targeting. It lets physics and happenstance make the choice for it.
It's super well put. The Errol Otis art, I think, makes a really good impression of what you're saying about the cave fisher is isolating one of its targets. Is in that picture, the cave fisher has got one thing it's pulling up to its horrible mandibles, and the rest of the party is at this point very far away. On the other side of it, apparently uncrossable chasm.
Maybe they were isolated and oblivious to begin with.
Right? Maybe so. Now, here's the thing. Here's the teeny tiny little change from first edition. If I look in that Dungeons of the Slave Lords adventure, where the cave fisher originally appeared, the weight limit wasn't 200 pounds. It was 400 pounds.
That's a huge difference in 5e.
Right? Right?
Because of gear. Because of gear.
Yeah. How much more dangerous would it be if the limit was still 400 pounds in 5th edition?
Significantly more dangerous, because at that point you could get just about everyone except the fighter in plate mail, or the whoever your party tank is who's wearing plate mail, or carrying their house on their back like a snail. You could get probably 80% of PCs that way, whereas this way, you're down to about maybe 40%.
Do you think that change was made specifically as a balancing factor? Do you think somebody came in and was like, this is too much? That's fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating.
I mean, it legitimately could be based on the size of the creature, because a cave fisher is not that big.
Gotcha.
I want to recommend. There's the source of that image right there in the beginning. Of,
right, the cover of the inside book. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. For anyone looking for a good encounter design with the features of Cave Fisher, obviously there's A4, but also I would highly recommend the 2010 Osric module called Stone Sky Delve. If you've never seen this, it was run at Gen Con 2010 as a convention game. And the most fascinating thing, spoilers for anyone who's not read this module, is that it includes two versions of the underground map that is both a top-down view and a side view, because it highly takes advantage of three-dimensional terrain. And I think that's really interesting for the cave fisher is coming up with these situations like what we see in the Arrow Lotus art, where the environment is also playing a factor. That typically the best time really to hit the players, I think, with the cave fisher is when they're already trying to traverse something difficult. Right? They're already dealing with a chasm or ledges or some kind of vertical movement through an underground system, and now one of them got pulled away into some remote location.
Yeah. And they have spider climb, so they can hang upside down on the ceiling. And the best place for them is really on a ceiling that is about 60 feet up, which is the maximum range of their filament. Then they can yank someone off the ground, and now you've got that terrible Roper conundrum, which is, do I escape and fall, or what? What's the other alternative? Sit here and get munched? I mean, it's a Scylla and Charybdis choice. I talk about cave fishers as being primarily solitary hunters, but you might have a place where, because of traffic underground or whatever, the hunting is really good. And it might be so good that it attracts several cave fishers. And you can get these hilarious situations where, like, one of the cave fishers yanks your party's halfling up into the air, and then one of the other cave fishers, instead of trying to hunt the other creatures on the ground, tries to take the halfling away from the first one. And the halfling is just getting yanked around through the air by all these multiple cave fishers while their allies down on the ground try to figure out what to do about it.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. I like that idea a lot, actually. That's great. I also like your point about the fact that if a cave fisher hauls you up and you get away from it, the damage from the fall is actually much worse than the cave fisher itself.
Although, if you kill the cave fisher, you still got the problem of how to get down,
Right.
It really is super no-win.
Right. Now, one thing. Okay, so there's this one thing in 5th edition. That's one other thing in 5th edition that's a little odd. Is it has this flammable blood ability that if you get it down to half,
that is so stupid. That is so
right,
stupid.
Right. I think I know now. I think I know where that comes from. Is in the 1st edition rules, they've got this thing that says you can get away from the sticky filament if you apply alcohol. And then it says, and the creature's blood is very alcoholic. So I think that they were trying to give I think Schick was trying to give an out of okay, you've been stuck on it, you've been drawn in, you killed it, how do you get off it if you didn't bring any wine? Well, the blood from the creature will actually release you. I think that was the original intent. But 5th edition turned it into this, it'll blow up better.
It'll blow up.
Flammable blood.
Which is
sometimes I can't even.
Well, they're trying. They don't hit everything they don't get the A+ every single time, but they're trying. They do pretty well. Now let's talk about so Keith, you mentioned something right before the show started that I thought was interesting, and obviously here at Wandering DMs we're going to have our last episode of the season next week. Paul is tomorrow night on 10 Dead Rats is going to wrap up that campaign. He's going to have the last session of his campaign that's been going on for about 2 years. And on the issue of how do you bring things to a reasonable end, you just told us that you had a Rise of Tiamat campaign that was running for about 6 years that you just ended in June. How did you do that?
Yeah. So just to give a little bit of background, it began as a... for anyone out there who has The Monsters Know What They're Doing, in the introduction to the book, I talk about my wife asking me to run a D&D campaign for her and her coworkers. So this is that campaign. It began with Lost Mine of Phandelver, and then when they graduated out of that at level 4, we went straight into Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat. And in the meantime, there were some side quests that I had written for the players to achieve personal goals, and we went on hiatus for a year when both my wife and another of our players both had children. And so we came back and finished the campaign in June of this year with the big fight against Tiamat. And then, of course, you got to have a denouement, because you don't want it to just end like a Neil Stephenson novel. No offense, I love Neil Stephenson.
Ouch!
Dude doesn't end books, he stops. Anyway, so after everyone has had a chance to recover from the fight and head back home to Waterdeep, I decided that I was going to end it the way they ended Ocean's 11, where they're all gathered around. Who leaves first, and where do they go? And I just one by one, I let people decide. Great. When do you leave, and who leaves first, and where do you go? And then who leaves next, and where do you go? And I thought I felt like that worked really, really well, and I really liked doing it that way. And then we also did where are you a year later? What are you doing a year later?
Nice. You know, I just started rewatching Ocean's 11 last night, as a matter of fact. It's so funny you bring that up.
I mean, this is
do you know how they? I don't know if you've read the director's commentary on that or read the trivia, but the director of that, what was Soderbergh, right? It was Steven Soderbergh who directed that. Yeah, Soderbergh told them, "Okay, you're all gathered around the fountain at I think it's the Bellagio." He says, just stand here, watch the fountain, and leave when you feel like it's the right moment for your character to leave.
Nice.
And that's what they did. That whole scene was improvised, including Carl Reiner just staying there to the bitter end and never leaving.
Fascinating.
They all just left when they felt like it was right to leave.
It feels very natural. It feels very, very natural, and it can
totally does.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. I mean, this harkens back to our previous discussion, right? About player control. No, we call it control. What do we call it? I can't remember.
Player narrative control.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Sure. Something like that.
It was one
autonomy. Player autonomy.
Right. It was 1 week ago.
Yeah. Agency. That's the word you're looking for. Agency. Player agency.
Thank you.
It's very similar, honestly, to the technique I've used in many campaigns, and probably you will see tomorrow night of basically turning it over to the players and saying, "All right, we're at the end. Tell me about what happens to your player." I've also seen a technique where you increment the amount of time person by person. You say you turn to the first person and say what happens to your character the next day, and then the next person, what happens to your character a week later. And where are you a year later, and et cetera, and you just keep advancing the clock until everybody's got a chance to go, and the last person wraps it up. I'll
tell you one thing, though. I love the way the fountain technique worked so well. Yeah, I'm just going to use that every time.
Just gonna maybe I'll see how things turn out tomorrow night. Maybe I'll just steal that.
I stole it.
Yeah. There you go. My question to you.
From a movie about stealing stuff, so it seems.
Yeah. There you go. Great. And if it doesn't land, I can blame Keith, right? So that's helpful. Sorry, I have another question for you, Keith, which was when you started when you started the Dragon Queen, or like at what point as you were introducing content did you think to yourself, well, when we get to the end of this content, the campaign will be over and we'll just be done?
Oh, I always knew it was going to end at the end of Rise of Tiamat.
Okay.
And I'll be honest, by the end of it, I was starting to feel really ready for it to be done, and especially when I hit chapter 8 of Rise of Tiamat, which I find this is the one involving the Thayans. I found that chapter to be extremely problematic, and I just skipped it entirely. I said I'm not running this. Not only I mean I try to be very, very positive about things, but this chapter really made me angry because not only well, number one, it pushed my biggest button, which is torture. My personal opinion is there is no place for torture in tabletop role playing. Maybe there are people who think there are situations in which you can make it work somehow, make it okay. Not in my game, ever. That is something I will never, ever touch. But the other thing was just a stupid, pragmatic epistemology thing, which is here you have someone who's interrogating your characters, interrogating your PCs, but you don't know what she already knows. How are you supposed to run an interrogation scene if you don't know what the person interrogating the PCs already knows and is still trying to find out? It makes no sense. You know, there is something that is at the root of all of my dungeon mastering, all of the writing I've done, which is that every creature on your campaign stage, every monster, every NPC has its own life, its own purposes, and when you're not looking, it's off doing its own things. And it's living its life. It's not there just to show up when you need it to be. You know, it's like the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead theory. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern still have things to do even when they're not on stage. And so I am always very highly concerned about what every person or creature knows, because that is what animates their behavior. It's what drives their choices. And if you have this important scene, this set piece scene in which you're being interrogated by this powerful wizard, but you're not told what she's trying to accomplish through this interrogation, it's a stupid waste of time. And then just on top of that, to add in torture just as an atmospheric element, I was so angered and offended by that chapter that I refused to even try to adapt it for the campaign. I just said, this is gone. This is out. I'm not wasting my time trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear here.
Yeah, I think that's super important. That you know, kind of part of the DM's role, right? Is especially if you're running pre-written content, is that you are the editor, right? And so you got to know your taste, you got to know your table's tastes, and you got to tailor it. I mean, anyone who's watching 10 Dead Rats and following along with the Enemy Within campaign, which is what we're running, will know that I cut out the entire fourth book. I just didn't run it because I don't think I was quite as offended as Keith is here with the piece of content, but I was like, I didn't think it added. It wasn't.
And I tell you, there's very, very little that gets under my skin the way that particular chapter did. I don't think I personally have. I know other people have run into things that really set them off. I have never run into anything anywhere in 5e D&D that set me off the way this did.
I haven't read that adventure. I'm very surprised to hear that that's included in an official product. I'm very surprised.
I mean, it was one of the first official products they put out.
Okay.
I do know they outsourced the writing of it, and
okay.
You know, and there are a few things that there are a few real eyebrow raisers that crept into 5e that even as an old man playing this game, remembering how things were years ago, in the old days, you know, there are certain descriptions, like the descriptions of the half-orc in the player's handbook and the descriptions of orcs in the monster manual, which are they just made me go, how did this get through editing? How did nobody stop and say, this is nothing but a bunch of racist stereotypes dumped together in a soup pot? Isn't there anything we can do with this material that might be less obviously bad? It boggles my mind that made it through editing, and you know, Wizards has made some serious efforts, not enough for some, too much for others, to try to address some of the problematic things in D&D. And I'm glad they have at least taken seriously the way that orcs have been depicted in the past, because I have thought for 30 years that they needed something better than what they got. I also, little controversial, little spicy here. I also think that they have occasionally misdiagnosed a problem and adopted solutions that deal with the issue superficially, but don't solve the underlying issue. I don't want to get into too many specifics here and turn this whole conversation into a lightning rod. But
it wouldn't be the first time we've accidentally done that. I'll say that.
In some cases, yeah. In some cases, there are real problems that exist, but the solutions seem to solve the problems, but don't really. And I'll leave it at that. Yeah. But I also say to me, they are clearly trying, and they're aware that mistakes have been made, and are trying to do something about them.
But you know, then they released that whole.
Thank you. But they released that whole 2-volume set of Horde of the Dragon Queen, Rise of Tiamat. They republished it as one adventure, and I haven't looked at the republished set, but I don't know if they did anything with that chapter. I know they re-released Curse of Strahd and tried to purge the descriptions of the Vistani of offensive anti-Roman stereotypes. But I don't know whether they did anything with Rise of Tiamat or not.
We are in the last minute here of the show. I just want to roll us back to the initiating topic here, which was ending your campaign. So I'm just kind of curious, because I really it's very fascinating to me, Keith, to hear about how you architected the end of your campaign, and I'm curious if that's a common practice for you across campaigns, or I feel like a lot of campaigns end kind of just by running out of steam. Right, I've experienced that myself a lot of times.
First opportunity I've ever had to end a campaign.
No, really.
Like this is the first time I've ever gotten to play a story all the way to the end. It's great. It's great. And you know, I love and one of the best things about it, honestly, is I think this is every D&D player's dream, is to see a good artist illustrate their character. Or illustrate their party. Like every D&D player wants this, and I was as a final gift to my players at the end of this campaign, I was able to hire MOAR to do a big group character portrait.
Oh, nice.
And
Wow.
can I show it off? Because I love this so much. Let me see if I can make the screen sharing work here.
We're pushing the technology. Hopefully this works.
Is that a thing in VMix?
That is a thing in VMix now. There it is.
Oh, nice.
There it is.
Oh, hi.
Very nice.
That's great.
Magnificent.
Yeah,
Magnificent. Aviv is amazing.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
Fantastic.
Wow.
All right, we are definitely running
Thank you for
the clock
sharing that.
now, and yeah, thank you so much, Keith. I guess any final thoughts from anyone? Anyone last thoughts on some of the monsters we've covered or ending campaigns?
I'll just make a pitch for Keith's book. You know, I appreciate what you do so much, Keith, particularly someone, right, who plays a lot of D&D, but not quite so much 5th edition, frankly. You really give me an enormous head start at knowing how to run monsters, specifically in 5th edition, if I don't know it already. And your blog and your books are fantastic. They're going to be a major element of my prep for future tournament type stuff. And people should go get more.
More.
I think that's more. Monsters know what they're doing, and you can pre-order it now at your favorite bookstore or online bookstore, and you can go to Keith's site at themonstersknow.com, and you'll see more links to everything.
Indeed. You can take a look in the description text of the video here if you want. I'm sure there will be links directly to Keith's blog, as well as more that reiteration of that information about where to find the new book.
And now that I'm finally done writing my 4th book, or at least done enough to tell my editor that I'm done, I can get back to updating the blog again, which is something my readers can look forward to.
Great.
In the coming year.
Cool.
I meant to have this book done in February, so I'm sorry to every blog reader who has been waiting an entire year for me to update the content. Believe me, it's been hurting me too. But there will be more The Monsters Know What They're Doing blog content in 2022. Promise.
Great.
We are all looking forward to it.
We are indeed. Viewers, any comments on the Lucrata or the Cave Fisher or Darkness or ending your campaign? Please leave us some comments in the video here. Tell us what we forgot, what we missed, and I'm sure we'll be very excited to see that, and possibly that will instigate a new, even more detailed conversation down the road.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're new to the Wandering DM show, remember that you can like, follow, and subscribe to us, the Wandering DMs, on YouTube and Twitch and Twitter and Facebook, and also GitHub if you're a coder. And we do have the handle Wandering DMs on all of those sites. So look for us there, and you'll get updates on future guests like Keith.
If you prefer to listen to this show in audio-only podcast format, you can get those podcasts at our website at wanderingdms.com. You can also find us on various podcast carriers such as Google Podcast, iTunes, Spotify. If you're listening to this show right now on one of those sites, please take a moment to rate and review us there. That helps other users of that site find our show, and we really appreciate it.
We really do. As always, huge thanks to our patrons who support the show, and if you would like to join them, please visit patreon.com/wanderingdms, and you'll see a couple different tier options. We have discounts on merch, access to our private Discord server, monthly behind-the-scenes videos, polls, and surveys, and after-party chat that we do every Sunday right after our show. We will be there in about 5 to 10 minutes on our Discord server to continue the conversation on the live chat there. As noted, Paul is going to be on with 10 Dead Rats tomorrow night for the conclusion to the 10 Dead Rats campaign cycle, so we're very much looking forward to that. And then Isabel and I are trying to do one last Book of War in our wargaming series for the year. That might be this coming Saturday. We really hope to get one more in at least. But don't forget, of course, big thanks to Keith. Look for more Monsters Know What They're Doing, and we will all look forward to that with great anticipation. Keith, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you again for inviting me. It's a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Of course, we are live every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, so please join us again next week for another thought-provoking discussion.
See you then.